This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. I'd like to do more of a comprehensive review of the draft, like a few days after it's happened. Like, I feel like the Monday after the draft is hot take central. Oh, this team didn't get a starter here, it's the worst draft in the world. Or this team is going to be an immediate worst to first contender because they just got 5 guys that were on Mel Kiper's top 50 big board or whatever it is. And I think you just need time. Like, I think the best thing for draft analysis is time. So the more time I can have, the better. And that's why I waited to bring Corey Kinnan on, one of my favorite draft experts out there on Twitter, to kind of talk about what the Browns did in this draft. Defensive tackle, in the run that defensive tackle went on early in the second was like something that kind of surprised me. I didn't expect that many to go that quick. Like, even T'Vondre Sweat, somebody decided to pull the trigger on him at 36, which, like, given everything, like, there were concerns of him at 36 before all the off-field stuff. So, like, to take him at 36, deal with that, I thought that was, like, maybe. Do you think that there was a panic from some of these GMs, like, once you got to 40 and you realize, like, all these defensive tackles were flying off the board? Or you think this is a situation where, like, the Browns were looking around, they saw the defensive tackles go, and they're like, well, I mean, Mike Hall is still there. We like Mike Hall. We're just going, like, if they just got lucky that the guy that they like, nobody else is trying to pick, like, at 20 and 30.
Yeah, so I mean, that was bizarre because I thought there were quite like a couple tackles that went in the top 40 that I'm like the Rams, if you look at what they traded, like they gave up a future second round pick to come up and get Braden Fisk, and I'm just like, you gave up what to come up there and get that guy? And I like Rook Ohorhoro or whatever his name is, but like, Atlanta traded, like, these guys are trading up to get these guys. Like,
yeah, and like,
for as much as I
passing on
like
Johnny
Rook
Newton
as a player, like, think he's probably the best run defender in the class. Like, you traded into the top 35, or I think he was picked 35. Like, you traded into the top 35 to get him, and that's like not a cheap investment to make to come up and get these guys. And then I think that just the Titans made a bad pick. Like, I just think that's a bad pick. Like, you drafted a guy that, like Dane Brugler said, this guy was routinely playing at 390 pounds in the season. Teams questioned his ability to get in shape, questioned his work ethic. He got a DWI 2 weeks before the draft. Like, and you took him 39th though. So I just think the Sweat pick is a bad pick. Like, yes, I know he won like the Outland Award. Like, for the most part, NFL teams don't care about college accolades. They just don't. Like, that's not part of their evaluation process. So,
like, look at how, like, if you watch the UFL, you'd be like, wow, lot of award winners in the UFL, right? Like, a lot of Maxwell guys there. Or what's the kicker award in college
football?
Football?
Award?
The Lou Groza? Yeah, like, they got 4 Lou Groza award winners in the UFL. And they're good kickers. It's just like, being good in college is not a direct translator to being good in the NFL, because, like, we're going to probably talk about this when it comes to Zach Zinter and how we project that pick going forward. But it's like, what can make you a great college player could easily not translate to the NFL. I mean, like, you got to be able to have another ace up your sleeve when it comes to the league, because it's just a different game.
Right. And so, like, when I look at the Titans pick, like, yeah, I think T'Vondre Sweat has a little more pass rush savvy than you would think that somebody that size would have. But, like, for the most part, you drafted Siaki Ika 39th overall.
Oof.
Like that's the equivalent that I kind of see. Like, when people would mock T'Vondre Sweat to the Browns in mock drafts in the offseason, I'm like, they just drafted Siaki Ika last year. Why would they do that? You drafted a nose tackle 39th overall. So, but in terms of the Browns and Mike Hall, like, I would like to think the Browns aren't a front office that panic by runs on position and just stick to their board, but I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like, especially like they get 2021 and the pick of Anthony Schwartz. Like, do I think they would have picked Anthony Schwartz in a vacuum? Or if like there wasn't a huge run on wide receivers, I don't know. Was Anthony Schwartz really the top guy on their board? Maybe. If so, like that's I would say a pretty flawed board, but I think that might be an indication like, they saw running receivers and they're like, we need to get one. And that could have been the case with Mike Hall, but again, we're talking a fringe top 50 pick. And we're talking about a guy that we talked about it on your show before the draft. Like Mike Hall is as good of a scheme fit for Jim Schwartz as you will find anywhere.
Hmm.
I've tweeted out that there might not be a better scheme fit player to scheme in the entire draft class than Mike Hall to the Browns. Like if you just look at how Jim Schwartz develops, uses those gap shooting defensive tackles throughout his entire career as a defensive coordinator, as a defensive play caller, he loves those dudes who can just absolutely penetrate gaps. Who can like and have like unbelievable pass rush savvy, and that's what Mike Hall has.
Hmm.
Like he's one of the best pure pass rushing defensive tackles in the class. Analytically, only Johnny Newton was better than him
Mm.
as a pass rusher. So I think with Mike Hall, I don't think it had to do with a run on defensive tackles as much as it's like Mike Hall's probably up there on their board.
Yeah, because like when it's the polar opposite of the Siaki Ika pick. They took Siaki Ika and it's like 2 years. And I'm like, one thing I can say with Andrew Berry picks, almost all of them, you can go, well, they had a plan, right? It just didn't work out. If it doesn't work out, but if it does work out, the plan is obvious, right? Like with Anthony Schwartz, they had a plan. He never lived up to that plan, right? Like you weren't confused on the overall philosophy on why they made that pick, especially day two. They're very cerebral about these things. Siaki Ika is the one pick where I'm like, well, I just don't know what the plan was. Like, I
Yeah.
don't get it. Like, clearly you don't believe in him because you had chances to put him into rotation this year. You have gone out of your way to make it obvious to everybody he's not in the rotation,
You drafted
right?
two defensive tackles in one weekend, man. Like,
Yeah. And one of them hit 40 on the bench press. So you have to imagine, like, whatever Ika was doing, he's competing with Ika on that, right?
mhm.
So it's one of those things where I'm like, what happened with that pick? Because that pick does not make any sense compared to like what Andrew Berry likes. It doesn't make sense compared to what I know people say it's a Jim Schwartz pick, right? But he doesn't fit Andrew's profiles. He doesn't fit Jim's profiles. Like this pick is like, okay, I could see a world where like they were like, nah, we had a great grade on this guy. He's 20. Like he has the athleticism stuff that Andrew likes. He has the scheme fit stuff that like this is like, okay, they're turning that card in. If he's there, it makes sense to me. So I just find that dynamic interesting, and I'm still wondering like what was the plan with Siaki Ika? I just because like even if the plan was to make him lose weight and play three tech on a regular basis, he does not strike me as somebody who would be a great athlete if they lost 60
No,
pounds.
no, but there is some like some of his 2021 tape. Like he's got some like he's more agile than you'd expect a guy that big to be, but his 2022 tape is just awful. Like
Yeah.
that senior year at Baylor is just awful. And they had him
I
some decent
remember
scenes, but
I
one
remember
thing that
people talking about the penguin waddle. Like he's like, he waddles out there. I'm like, that's just he's not gonna lose a ton of weight and be like he's not gonna be a plus athlete just because he loses weight. It's like Danny Shelton would have had a better chance of losing weight and becoming a more versatile athlete because he was like really quick and fast for like somebody who was like what pushing 400 like he was in that
Mhm.
draft class, which we could have a conversation if Tavondre Sweat is even a better draft pick than Danny Shelton, but that's a whole nother can that we don't need to open right now.
I will say though, I like to say like, and there was like a Bill Belichick quote a couple weeks like right before the draft that came out as well, where Bill Belichick was saying like, I don't even grade guys until halfway through their second season. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think, we talked about this with Cedric Tillman last time I was on, and I think we can give the same grace to Ika, even though like Ika is a much more sketchy pick. We're like, well, that doesn't fit anything they ever look for. But I like to give guys one off season in the program. Like
Mm.
when rookies get drafted, they get drafted in April. They're in training camp by July. Like they have that rookie mini camp, but it's 3 months until it's like full go for them. When the season ends, they're doing exit interviews where like firmer expectations are set, and they have an entire off season of understanding what their expectations are, an entire offseason of programmatic expectations of what the Browns are. They give these guys like, in the offseason, you should work on this. And I will say that one picture that they just took of Eco with the defensive lineman, he looks quite a bit thinner. So I still don't have high hopes for the pick, but I will say I do like to give guys one full offseason in the building before we really make a judgment. And like, especially I said this with Tillman last time too, but Tillman comes from an offense that he did not have to do anything. Like there was
Mm.
no cognitive aspect asked of him. Like he never had to run a choice route. He never had to read out leverage and bend his routes around leverage. He was running nines, he was running eights, and he was running twos. That was it. So I have some grace for these guys. And we saw what it did for Alex Wright last year, right? Like his rookie season, Jadeveon Clowney gets hurt week 2. He's starting by week 3, fresh off of like coming from a G5 program, starting for the Browns week 3. He did not have a very good rookie season. Give him a full offseason in the building. They reduced his snap count last year too, which is much needed. And then by the end of the season, there he had 5 sacks in the last 5 games of the year. So like, just give these young guys a little bit of time.
I guess my criticism of Ika isn't really of Ika. It's more of the process that brought him here.
Oh, I get
because
it.
like that's yeah, that's what I think most of my smoke is for. Like, because like Ika, I'll give him time. I'm just like, I don't even see where they're gonna have time to give him that room to develop, because it's like, I mean, like I feel like they're trying to get him up out of there already. Like it just doesn't. That's where I'm like, what was the process behind that selection? Like I wasn't a fan of the Ika pick when they made it, but I was willing to give it time. But once it becomes obvious that like you don't have a plan, I do feel like that starts to speed this process up, where it's like, hey, like, are we even going to be at a point like with Anthony Schwartz? I was willing to get that time because like they were really trying to make it happen, right? Like they really were. It just
They even
wasn't.
gave Anthony 2 years though. If that tells you anything,
Yeah.
they gave Anthony 2 years. So
They gave him what, 3, right? He got 3 training camps.
he got 3 training camps. Yeah,
Jordan Elliott got 4, right? If they had a plan for you, they're gonna put you in a position to try to fulfill that plan. Like it's like the opposite of even what they did with Jordan Elliott. Was like, hey, Jordan Elliott's gonna get a chance to start every year. Jordan Elliott should start. Then we go start the season. Jordan Elliott is starting, right? With Ika, I'm like, he wasn't active last year, and I don't see a path for him to be active this year. So like, how are we even gonna find out? Is really the question with Ika, because it's like he's never gonna be put in a position to play. Like I feel like they got instant regret on that pick, but we have spent like 8 minutes talking about Siaki Ika. but Mike Hall, I like the pick. They go Zach Zinter 85, and this is one where I'm like, there's a lot of narratives about him. One narrative I don't necessarily find myself buying off of what people are like presenting it as is the whole, well, he got injured. If he never gets injured, he's a second round pick thing to me, because I think he had questions that like the injury, if he doesn't have it, could have helped answer, right? If we got to see him play against Alabama, if we got to see him play against Washington, if we got to see a week of him at the Senior Bowl, if we got to see him test at the Combine, maybe we feel better about him and that then raises his stock. But he went where he went. Like, I think he went about where he probably should have gone in the 3rd round. My assessment is that this is a big, strong guy who won by being big and strong a lot at Michigan. Not as impressive versus some of the bigger schools, which is a big concern, and probably needs to adjust to get to where he has to. What's your assessment on Zach?
Yeah, so first the injury. I would say the injury played no play in his pre-draft process, other than not being able to test, other than not doing the Senior Bowl. Those things, sure. But the tape is the tape, and he has a lot. It's not like he was an Amarius Mims who started 8 games in his college career. You know what I'm saying? Like this guy was a 4-year starter at Michigan, 3-year starter at Michigan. So like, there's lots of tape out there on him. And if the injury was a factor, it would have been a factor in the opposite direction. So like, my inclination is to say he didn't get flagged at all at the Combine for medicals. Like, and he's already saying I'm ready for rookie minicamp. Like, the injury is not a thing. If it were a thing, it would have caused him to fall, not rise. So I'm pretty sure he got a clean bill of health at the Combine. Didn't get red flagged, and that was that. I think I've always just kind of viewed him as a fringe top 100 pick. Going back to last year, this year. I mean, he's mean, and that's kind of what you want in a guard, you right? So he'll look for work and he'll play through the whistle. So you can start there. I do think some of the technical stuff with his hands needs a little bit of work, but I don't know what kind of athlete he. I mean, I have a good idea that he's probably an average, maybe slightly above average athlete. We didn't get that confirmed at the combine because of the injury, but um, I think he's a good player. I think he's a good player with a high floor. He's a player that you won't miss on, if that makes sense. Like trying to think of a good example of this, like maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba last year, when we're talking about wide receivers last year, that class, he was the first one off the board at like the 20th overall. Not a good wide receiver class. Does Jackson Smith and Jigba have the highest ceiling we've ever seen? No, he's not the best athlete we've ever seen. He doesn't have a trait that like really explodes off the tape. Besides, his, he's a good ball tracker. He catches everything, sure, but like he's not a great separator. He doesn't play through contact great, but when the Seahawks picked Jackson Smith and Jigba as the first receiver off the board, they said we're not going to miss on this pick. Like he's not going to flat out bust. And I think that's kind of how I view Zinter-ish when we're talking about if we're translating that to interior offensive lineman in day three or like round three, right? So they're not going to miss on that pick. I think Zinter is going to start games maybe as early as 2025. And I think he'll be an okay. I think he'll be a good starter. Like I just think he'll be a good player. But I wouldn't say like, oh, he's got all pro guard potential, blah, blah. Like you said you don't want to talk about value a whole lot, and I get it. It gets really nitpicky, but like if you don't have picks inside the top 75, everything's a freaking value. If you don't have pick, no, let's say inside the top 64, everything's a value. Like everything's value. You know what I'm saying? So like at some point you have to shoot for floor. If you're picking third round and later every time, you got to shoot for floor. And I think Zinter's a good floor pick.
Yeah, that's what I think too. Let's go to Jamari Thrash. This is one that like I think opinions about him vary like wildly all over the place. Now, I accidentally got to see him play at Georgia State because I just like randomly went to watch him play against Georgia Southern one time. And I remember he was number one on that team, and he was catching everything in that game that I saw him in, and the quarterback play was awful for Georgia State. Like it's Sunbelt football. Like sometimes you just get that at the quarterback position. And I walked away very impressed with him, and I remember seeing him at the Senior Bowl and thinking to myself, okay, like this, he's not going to be one of those receivers. I don't think he's like going to be a 1 or 2 receiver ever in his career. But like I like to call it the Willie Snead class. Like 400 to 700 yards maybe, like on a great year, and you're getting a lot of first downs, right? Like a chain mover basically is what I think he has the potential to be in an NFL team. I know people are worried about the drops. Like, are you worried about the drops he had his last year at Louisville, or do you think that was like risk related?
So if you look at his Georgia State like data from the year before, he dropped like 4% or 5% of passes. It was 11 this year, 11% of passes this year. And Dane Brugler wrote in The Beast, his guide this year, that Jamari actually played through a broken hand the last 4 games of the year.
Ooh.
So that'll deteriorate your ability to catch the football, especially through contact and contested situations. So like his contested catch data is significantly lower at Louisville than it was. And some of that's level of competition increase, yeah, but like playing through a broken hand for 4 games it's not easy work. So the Pitt game was actually his most productive game, is also the most drops he had in the game, was 3 in that game as well. So like, yeah, he probably does have some concentration drops, but like also playing through a broken hand contributed to some of those drops as well. I actually really like Jamari. I think he's a dog. And what I think, again, there's this conception, Andrew Berry can't draft receivers, blah, 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 blah. He's never used a premium asset on a wide receiver. How do you know if you can draft wide receivers or not? Like you're making that assumption based off of taking fringe top 100 picks and a 5th round receiver. Like that's how we're making that determination. Same can be said with defensive tackle. Like Tommy Togiai didn't work out. Jordan Elliott, he's never picked a defensive tackle with a premium pick. Mike Hall's his first one. So like you can't, again, when we're talking anything outside the top 64 is all about finding floor, finding some sort of value. Like he
has like a ridiculous hit rate with these 2nd round picks too. That like that would determine like he's picked 2 1st round picks, right? But he's had a ridiculous hit rate with these 2nd round picks. So I'm like, and it's not just one position. I'm like, it would demonstrate to me that they seem to be good at this. Like yes. Because
nobody
the earlier
is good
they're
at
picking
drafting outside of the top 64. Nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody. So yeah, but what I like most about Thrash, and this will be the last thing I say before we can move on to the next guy, is he has way more alignment versatility than anybody gives him credit for. Like that dude was playing X and that dude was playing Z exclusively at Louisville. He played 10% of his snaps in the slot. So what that does, assuming he hits, assuming the Browns extend Amari Cooper, they've already got Jeudy under contract, is that gives them alignment versatility with Amari and with Jerry Jeudy as well. If you can say, you know what, Jamari can play the X in this package, you could put Jeudy in the slot and you could get some mismatches. You could put Amari slot and get some mismatches there. So that's what I like most about Jamari. Again, we nitpick and we criticize fifth, sixth, 7th round picks when like the hit rate on these picks is less than 5%. Like they picked a depth wide receiver in the 5th round.
Yeah, yeah. I think you drafted somebody in the 5th round that I think has a chance to, well, not just a chance, a strong chance to make the roster this year, and a chance to develop into a solid role player. And I think if you get that in the 5th round, like that's a hit. That's a great pick.
You get that in the 3rd round, that's a good pick. Yeah.
We can have a whole nother conversation about how skewed people's expectations are, and I wonder if that's like mainly happening here because the Browns just have had skewed draft boards where it's like, oh, we're actually not picking until the 2nd round, or maybe even before the draft, like last year, that they're not picking until the 3rd round, right? Like it maybe that has affected us because we're talking about the 3rd draft pick, but that's really like a 6th round pick for in most classes the last few years. But yeah, it feels like people have had vitriol about the Donovan Peoples-Jones pick, and I'm like, you got your pick back and he got 800 yards one year. Like that is a win. Like
people do not understand that Donovan Peoples-Jones at the pick he was selected at is a 99th percentile outcome. Like that's not like what you should expect a 6th round wide receiver to become. Like that's a 99th percentile outcome. What they got out of Donovan Peoples-Jones.
The fact that you even consider extending a dude that was a 6th round pick is a win, right? Like it's a win. Like Sione Takitaki, who was a 3rd round pick.
That's absolute like probably win. A 90th percentile outcome for his pick.
Like absolutely like a pretty productive role player. Like, like even we had the conversation about Jerome Ford. People could be disappointed in Jerome Ford, but 800 yards with 1,100 total. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily like stuff you're getting out of every late round pick that you have there. So it's just the expectations are a little bit skewed, and I think some of that has to do with just how comfortable people are being dishonest to try to prove a point at times. But let's talk about some of these later round guys. Nathaniel Watson, linebacker out of Mississippi State. I know you were looking at this linebacker class. Your guys this year were Edgerrin Cooper and Junior Colson, if I remember correctly. You weren't a big Peyton Wilson guy, which hilariously enough, he goes to Pittsburgh, and I had to hear nonstop comments in my comment section about how he's going to become a Hall of Famer now because Pittsburgh took him.
He's 25 years old without an ACL. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, people were telling me he's the next coming in the comment section, but Pittsburgh does that a lot with linebackers, but they haven't had a good one since like Ryan Shazier. But what do you think of him? What do you think his immediate path to try to make the roster is going to be? And do you think that there is something more for him to get out of his NFL? Well, there's obviously more for him to try to achieve for, but do you think there's more on the bone there than just a special teamer?
So his immediate path is special teams, for sure. If you look at 2 of the guys the Browns didn't bring one back and haven't brought the second one back, it's Matthew Adams and Jordan Kanashik. Both were on the roster to play special teams. That's the entire purpose. Yeah, Kanashik got on the field near the end of the season, and that's what happens when you put a special teamer on the field. Is the tape he gave you. So his immediate path is playing special teams. But I actually think this guy, I wouldn't discount him fighting out Sam reps with Tony Fields and with Devin Bush. I like Tony Fields quite a bit because you can move him to Will, you can move him to Mike, you can play him at Sam. So I like Tony Fields quite a bit, but he's not a very authoritative linebacker. The way that Sione Takitaki was an authoritative linebacker. And if we're talking about a Sam linebacker that you're sticking on the edge in base defenses, Sam linebackers only play 12, 15 snaps a game because nobody's coming out in 12, 13 personnel where they're forcing you to put 12 personnel is coming back, but like for the most part, you're still putting a third DB on the field if they're in 12 personnel compared to base with three linebackers on the field. So that's 12, 15 snaps a game. And when the Browns are typically in base, they're asking a lot of their Sam linebacker to either set an edge, to press an interior gap or something like that. And that doesn't really scream like it's Tony Fields' game to me. So I wouldn't be shocked if Nathaniel Watson finds some Sam reps, Sam reps, depending on how training camp goes. He might be able to squeak some snaps away from Devin Bush and Tony Fields, who people say are probably competing at Sam right now. But I also think Nathaniel Watson could be backup Mike at some point as well.
Yeah, that Sam competition is interesting to me because I'm like,
Mhm.
it's not a role that they seem to emphasize as much, like going forward, because they just gave Greg Newsome the 5th-year options, which means he's going to be on the field a lot. When he's on the field, then we know who's not on the field, right? That
Right.
third linebacker, more than likely. So I look at it, I'm like, because Sione Takitaki like had a lot of really like impact, and like his best thing that I think he offered was like that. Yeah, he could do Sam, but when you needed somebody to step up and play Mike, like he was pretty good at that too.
And he learned it on the fly, which is
Which is
I love
just
Sione, man. I love Sione Takitaki.
he's just the kind of player, like he's never going to get like an acknowledgement team kind of
Mhm.
thing, but he will always be like
He
a
do his job.
favorite player in the city that
Yeah,
he plays in, because you're like, man, he just makes plays sometimes.
he just does his
Um,
job.
yeah, but Taki, I think that is a player that they're gonna miss, that they were not able to bring back. And I'm wondering like how do they fill that role, and I get why they took the flyer on somebody like Devin Bush, because like you could see potentially maybe he could
Mhm.
do that, but like I've seen the last 2 years of Devin Bush.
We've all seen you, Devin.
like I'm not gonna act like I feel like he's like even a lock to make the roster at this point. But yeah, I'm just wondering what that's going to look like. And I think there is an open spot there, an opportunity, because I like Tony Fields. I think people kind of shit on Tony Fields for no reason. But
He's
yeah,
like the blueprint for a depth linebacker. He can play Will if JOK goes down. He can play Mike if Hicks goes down. Like he's what you want. And he plays base
mhm.
Sam. At least he did a little bit when, every linebacker was hurt in 2022. So I really do like Tony. But again, it's the last year of his contract too. But I do think like Nathaniel's a throwback, man. Like they don't make linebackers like Nathaniel Watson anymore. So
Mhm.
somebody will come down and punch you in the face. So I do think that if he took on some Sam reps, like 10 sacks from an off-ball linebacker is not just like random
Yeah,
sporadic, like
no,
luck.
35 pressures, 10 sacks is pretty like, I looked at that. I was like, I had to look at the tape again. I was like, did he play outside linebacker, like edge, or is he a linebacker? But yeah, that's stuff that I'm like, okay, maybe he can factor into that conversation. Like maybe there is a role for him on the field, because I don't think anybody's really jumping out as doing that specific thing
Right.
that you need the Browns to have at linebacker. Now let's get to, we know, because I think the Browns have like 6th and 7th round picks like within these next 2 years.
Mhm.
They're not going to roster but maybe 3 of these guys. Like if they really hit, like it's just going to be tough for these guys to make the roster. South Dakota cornerback Miles Harden, they took him 7th round, pick 227. What do you think of him as far as like, will he be? I think he's probably like, when you're taking in 7th round, realistically, you're competing to make the practice squad.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where he is right now.
Yeah. I would also say that mainly because they signed two corners this offseason who are both special teams aces.
Hmm.
And so unless Miles comes in and proves I can be a special teams ace to knock either Justin Hardy or Tony Brown off the roster, which Tony Brown has the familiarity with Bubba Ventrone, and Justin Hardy has literally made a Pro Bowl as a special teamer, and he's from Cleveland. Like that doesn't seem like a very firm pathway. But what the Browns did say in the press conference after drafting him is they like him in the slot and they like him as potentially a safety.
Mm.
That changes things, to where like, well, D'Anthony Bell or Ronnie Hickman, but Ronnie Hickman played pretty well when he had to come in. Out if you burn the playoff game tape, Ronnie Hickman played pretty well when he came in. Because I kind of Houston picked on him big time, and
Yeah, we didn't talk about it enough going into that game that Rodney Hickman was going up against CJ Stroud. And CJ
yeah,
Stroud probably knows exactly what Rodney Hickman can't do.
yeah.
Like from years of practice with him, which it showed in that game. It was a rough day for the young fella.
So I think there is a pathway, but like they just drafted Cam Mitchell, who played 400 snaps of special teams at Northwestern and played in the slot, started games in the slot for the
Hmm.
Browns last year. So like I don't think he's taking Cam Mitchell's spot. Are these two special teamers like are they battling for a roster spot with Tony Brown and Justin Hardy? Like
And,
it's hard to find a pathway for Miles Harden to make the roster.
and Cam was good at like
Cam was
punt
good,
coverage. Yeah, like, he was really good last
and
year.
he'll tackle. He'll tackle.
Yeah.
So
So, I don't know if it's going to be a tough role for him, but they must like him, like something that he could do. And
and
even
it's
at
not like
safety, I'm
a
like,
precursor to trading Greg because they just picked up Greg's fifth-year option. I don't think anybody's trading for $13.3 million on his contract. You know, like
yeah, yeah. But also, it's well, we talked about. I cannot believe I am blanking on his name right now. Oh, D'Anthony Bell, right? Even D'Anthony Bell, I thought he stepped in, played well when he had to come in with Grant Delpit's injury, and I think that's the second time we've talked about this with Bell. He's been on the team 3 years or 2 years, but I feel like there's been a couple times where we're like, hey man, like there might be something there with D'Anthony Bell. Like he has really good ball instincts, and he really like he could be a little bit of a playmaker when he's out there for what he is. So even it's just tough to make like this roster in general. I think there's like maybe tight end is a spot that where there can be room for somebody to sneak on. In linebacker, there's room for somebody to sneak on. Outside of that, and we're gonna get to defensive tackle. like there's some of these rooms are just closed. Like edge is closed.
there's
They
five of
have
them.
no more room. Yeah, like there's nobody's coming back. I mean, nobody's getting added to that room. Defensive tackle, I'm shocked they haven't closed the door yet. Like I thought the door was closed. Like after the Mike Hall pick, I'm like, okay, the door's got to be closed. They're done. They're done adding to this room. They swing around. It's pick 243. So, I mean, it's basically like bringing in a UDFA. But they bring in Juwan Briggs, big defensive tackle out of Cincinnati. 40 bench presses is the headline on him. And look, I don't know how long his arms are. His arms don't look like Sharif Floyd short. So 40 with regular sized arms at that height is just insane. Like to put up. Like, ooh.
Right. I'm looking up right now. I can find this really fast about his arm length.
Because I
Let's
don't
see.
think he
Let's see.
tested at the combine, and I don't think
32 and a quarter. So
it's not like 33 and a half like he's out here benching it, but it's still not. It's not like he had like 30-inch arms and like,
Right.
okay, well, yeah, you just pushing it.
not
Okay,
T-Rexing
like,
those things off of his chest.
yeah, like okay, it's easy.
Yeah. So this comes down to like, what do they think of Ika? You know, I tend to think that the selection of a second defensive tackle says that he's on shaky ground, especially drafting a second defensive tackle who probably would have shared a similar role to what Ika can do. You know, when Dalvin comes off the field, can you put somebody on there who can just like anchor in and not get blown off the ball? That's basically it. That's basically it. Don't get blown off the ball. Yeah.
Get on your knee if you got to, right? And do the turn.
Right. That's it. Don't get blown off the ball. When Dalvin's got to come off the field, just don't get blown off the ball. And Briggs is very much in that same mold. So, I mean, they could roster. I mean, even rostering 6 is a stretch. I think they'll roster 6, but Ika or Briggs would be that 6th because you got Dalvin. Shelby's on a 2-year deal. Unless you don't think Maurice Hurst is a lot to make the roster. But like he was really good when he was healthy, but he's also had season-ending injuries in 3 straight seasons. And then you have Mike Hall. That's 4 right there. Quentin Jefferson, he's going to start. That's 5. And then so that leaves Ika or Briggs. Like they're going to roster 6 unless they cut both those guys. Like it's weird, man. It's a weird. They're gonna have 11 defensive linemen probably on that final round, that final 53 man.
And I don't know how many they even keep active on the game day 48, right? Like Ika was on that 6-man cut, but he was never active.
He was active once Maurice Hurst blew out his bicep. He was active the rest of the season from that point on.
Yeah, and then even then they were like, it wasn't until like the Cincinnati game where they were like, okay, we'll let him play a lot when nobody's playing. And there were a number of times where I'm like, man, they could use some weight in that defensive tackle room. And they were like, nah, we're not gonna activate him. And I'm like, nothing about this. And again, I hate to turn this into another like dump on Ika thing because he is just a 2nd-year player. But nothing about how the Browns have moved organizationally this last year suggests to me that they are excited about Siaki Ika playing football. And that is a concern to me where I'm like, okay, well, like even then, like, okay, well, Ika got this 6th spot locked in. Nah, you're gonna compete Like it's
Yeah,
like damn.
the sixth defensive tackle's not being on. He's not on the game day roster. Like,
Yeah, it's
okay,
like you got to compete to be in sweats.
yeah.
Like it's a tough spot here for Ika. Any of the undrafted free agents that stood out to you that they brought in? I know what Javion Cohen has been one people have been talking a lot about, but anybody really stand out to you?
I mean, Cohen, not really. Like the way I look at it, even these priority free agents are those guys are like fast track to the practice squad. Like they had two make the roster last year, which Ronnie Hickman and
Mm.
Mahmoud Diabate made the roster last year. Um, but everybody was hyping up these edges that they signed, Lonnie Phelps and all those guys. And it was like, these guys are like, they're just fast tracking to the practice squad pretty much. So teams aren't making waiver claims they used to. Like waivers aren't crazy because there's no team really tanking. Like waiver claims were crazy when the Browns were tanking and they got first priority at all of them right off the bat. Like that's when it was crazy. It hasn't been like that in years. Teams aren't just like claiming players off off of waivers anymore. So like all these guys are reverting back to the practice squad. It's just kind of what it is. And especially when I look at this roster, they just drafted Zinter and they brought back Michael Dunn. And they just signed Brian Allen too, which I thought was really weird. I don't know if they're just bringing him in because he has familiarity with Dickerson and maybe he can help translate some key terms to these guys as they're learning a new offense. Well, I don't know, and then they drafted Luke Whippler last year, so like I don't see a pathway for Cohen making the roster. I think the BYU running back is the one that really interests me just because they didn't draft a running back. And I don't believe that Pierre Strong is a lock to make the roster. I thought Jerome Ford was probably, and again, the run blocking wasn't great last year, but was the least efficient running back in the NFL last year. So like,
Yeah.
unless they have a really clean indication of Nick Chubb's bill of health, which the way he's posted on social media and the lack of moves they've made at the running back position might indicate that he's going to be back sooner than people think. But I think the BYU running back's really the only one. I don't think any of these guys are making the roster.
Who's the kid they got from Georgia Tech last year?
Charlie
Johnson.
Thomas, the
Charlie
linebacker.
Thomas, yeah.
Yeah.
Was it a linebacker? I thought they had a running back from Georgia Tech
Oh, Hassan
last
Hall.
year.
Yeah, Hassan
Hassan
Hall.
Hall, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't make the roster
Okay.
though.
Because it just we get so wrapped up sometimes in the pre-draft stuff or the post-draft stuff where it's like, oh, these guys, I got to find a way for them all to make the roster. It's like we forget, like, hey, these dudes, like, they're just gonna bounce around, like most of them.
And I think it needs to be said, especially in this fan base, the Browns fan base, because for whatever reason, when anything like one bad thing happens, everybody like snowballs into like catastrophic thinking. But like these are good problems to have. Like this isn't, if Miles Harden or Juwan Briggs don't make the roster, that's not some sign of ineptitude from the front office that they can't even roster their own draft picks. Like there's seventh round draft picks on a really good roster. Like that's a good problem to have.
Yeah, it's just hard. I mean, they would have had a hard time cutting the 53 before the draft, right? Like, that's just a reflection of where they are as a team. Also, it's very possible that, hey, these guys might end up on somebody else's practice squad and then they find a way to loop back to the Browns. I mean, they literally just did that with Cade York, where it's like, okay, well, you spun around the practice squad and now you're back here on our practice squad. And look, if after this year's up with Dustin Hopkins, his contract's up, they might look at him again and say, hey, did you figure it out? I honestly, I think this is my one hot take with developmental players, and we'll get out of here. I think the one area, I hate when people say like the UFL or something should be like the farm system to the NFL, because I don't think that any NFL team is going to be like, hey, we're going to take a third round pick and let him play real snaps against real pros in the spring and playing real football. Like, no, they're not going to risk that injury level. But I do think for kickers, there is a lot of value, like kickers and punters. There is a lot of value in playing in the spring. And I'm like, Cade York is the perfect example of somebody. I'm like, send that motherfucker to Birmingham for like one spring so he could just figure it out. Like whatever was bugging him, he can figure it out in Birmingham. And then like, he'll probably be fine for you. Like, he's not going to be a world breaking kicker, but just like make the regular stuff. Like just get out of your head about the easy stuff.
Yeah.
And then you'll figure it out.
Bring one of those with you. That's my thing.
I just think it's the pressure. It's the pressure and the isolation with kickers on a professional roster where you go from college and you've seen these schools, like if you've been to his college, they keep like 12 kickers and long snappers and other, like there's a whole squad of special teamers that you can hang out with. You go to NFL, there's 3 dudes on the roster and like one of those guys might be 40 and ain't trying to kick it with you. Right. Like, so you're just kind of by yourself when you get drafted to these rosters. And I think that's something that spring football does emulate. It's like, hey, you kind of by yourself. You're just on the island kicking with like your other guys that are on special teams all the time. And you got to figure it out. Right. There's no comfort in this. And I think that's K York needs to have experience just kicking without that comfort, because he just seems so uncomfortable at times in the NFL. But yeah, that's my developmental hot take about how spring football should be used. Only really for specialists. I think everybody else I think they got the formula fine there. But thank you, Corey, for coming on, talking draft with me. We got into the nitty gritty. We talked about a lot of different things. Let them know where they can get more of some Corey Kennan takes and analysis about football.
Yeah, so Fake Corey Kennan is where I, talk the most shit on Twitter. So Fake Corey Kennan there. I am the managing editor at Browns Wire, so that's where most of my Browns Wire stuff is. But for the most part, I'm trying to do a lot more draft content this year. Get back to my draft content. I had a kid last year, so it really ate into my time to not be able to do draft stuff. But Daft on Draft is my Substack, and I have the Daft on Draft podcast that I'm relaunching on Monday. So the Daft on Draft podcast is coming back too.
Definitely, man. Got to check it out. Thank you, Corey, for joining us. Y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.